Okay guys, today we're going to talk about fuel systems on vehicles. Hopefully you can see these diagrams over here. I have three different types of fuel systems drawn here. We have our fuel tanks over here. There's another fuel tank and there's another fuel tank. Excuse my drawing, we got filler caps right there. That's where you would put the fuel in. Excuse me. And then over here we have some engines drawn with the type of fuel system. Basic fuel system, we're talking with carbureted vehicles. These would have been like from mid-80s older. Basically got a simple system. You'd have your fuel tank, there'd be a pickup tube in there. Right here, this area right there, I just drew an arm with a float. That would be your fuel gauge, the sensor in the tank that tells you how much fuel you have in your tank. This would float up and down depending on the level of fuel in your tank and of course go to your gauge. But then you got a fuel line that comes out of the top and goes down, and then it would go through a filter here. I just kind of drew a box with the filter, and then you would basically, the fuel would travel up, and this would be under a suction line. Your fuel pump was up at the engine. It was usually like a diaphragm pump, and it was actuated by the engine when the engine was running or rotating, and so that fuel pump would cause a vacuum which would draw this fuel up to the fuel pump, and then once it hit the fuel pump, then there would be a line that went up to your carburetor, and then the carburetor would of course then mix the air and fuel, make it an atomized fuel air mixture ratio for the engine to burn. So on the second diagram, we have the fuel tank, of course, with the fuel gauge indicator. But what we have here is the fuel pump is inside the tank, and they usually have a little sock on there. I'll show you that in a little bit. But these are a high pressure system, so when the fuel leaves the tank, it is under tremendous pressure, and then it comes up, gets forced through the fuel filter. So we got a strainer down here and a fuel filter here. We usually have a strainer there too with the fuel filter on the low pressure system. But then this goes up and goes to what they call a throttle body, or you'd hear it called as a TBI, throttle body fuel injection. And basically it was looked like a carburetor on top of the engine, but it had one or two injectors in there that worked under high pressure. They would generally have a fuel pressure regulator. So after it had high pressure at the throttle body, and then high pressure was coming out because the injectors would only use so much fuel. This pump was pumping more fuel than what the engine is going to need. So then it's high pressure coming back out. Then it usually goes to a fuel pressure regulator that's somewhere on the engine up here, and sometimes on the throttle body unit itself. And so it would regulate the pressure for what the injector would need, and then any fuel that wasn't used by the injectors would just recirculate and then get dumped back into the tank. So this is a circulating system. So the other system here is more commonly used today. It's set up similar to the fuel injection, the throttle body fuel injection system. Is you got the pump in the tank with the strainer. There's the float level gauge, and the high pressure fuel would go through the filter up to what they would call a fuel injection rail, and there would be a regulator on it too. But instead of going through a throttle body and mixing with the air, the injectors injects the fuel right into the cylinder, right by where the spark plugs would be and stuff. And then what wasn't used, of course, past the regulator, then it would recirculate back into there. What I didn't draw on all these systems is there's usually some type of a vent system on these tanks. They usually use what they call a charcoal canister or a purge canister somewhere on the vehicle, and it would take any vapors of fuel that built up in the tank, and it would put it in this charcoal canister, and then that canister was hooked up by a vacuum line somewhere on the engine block to where it would pull the fuel vapors, and it would burn that in the system instead of just out to the atmosphere. So there's usually some vents and other things Today we're going to be working on this type of system. It's a throttle body system. So let's get busy. Another thing to mention here, this top system, the low pressure system, it was all kind of mechanical. So there really wasn't much wiring to go with it. The fuel pump was ran mechanically off of the engine block. So the carburetor just kind of did its own thing the way it was set up. These two down here, these are all controlled by a computer. So there's a lot of wiring going on and sensors going on. The computer tells the injectors up here in the throttle body when to pulse. They just did little pulses, like super fast, depending on where your throttle was at, how much gas you was wanting to push down on the accelerator. There was a sensor that would tell the computer how to do all kinds of stuff, and then it would pulse the pulses to deliver what the fuel needed. So a computer is controlling this, and a computer is controlling, of course, this too. Just like a distributor on an ignition system, the computer is telling each one of those injectors when to fire into the appropriate system. So these two systems here basically ran off of the computer, and we'll get into computers and electricals at some other point in time. But this one's more mechanical. It didn't take electricity to run the fuel pump or anything on a mechanical pump. They did make low pressure electrical fuel pumps that wasn't on here, that was in line somewhere. That wasn't typically commonly used, but you can do some aftermarket things like that if need be. So okay guys, we'll work back on this truck here, and the reason why we're talking about fuel system, because that's what we're going through here. We determined when we was trying to start this truck that it wasn't getting fuel to the throttle body, and I've traced it back to where the problem should be this pump here. I've kind of fast forwarded ahead. I'm not going to show you how to drop a fuel tank or anything like that. This is a bigger truck. A lot of your cars and pickup trucks and stuff like that that you may be running into, the fuel tank is underneath in between the frames somewhere. This one just happens to be out here on the side of the truck. Does it make it any easier being out here? Yeah, I don't have to crawl underneath the truck to get to this, but basically the fuel tank's tank. There's usually some straps even that's holding the tank to the vehicle of some sort that you have to remove. Here you can see I have the pickup tube already removed out of the tank. So back under here I had to disconnect these lines. One of them's a pickup, one of them's a return, and then there's a couple of them for venting issues. Here I just got a bucket of bolts. I'm just holding, just covering the hole so I don't get debris in there. And of course we got the fill tube here, and then this fuel tank is right by the passenger side door, so we have a step to get into the door. That's just part of the tank. I also did have to remove a top plate that you could step on. I got it right over here. That mounts bolts to the top of this tank for a step also. So we're gonna get this fuel pump replaced, and let's get this in the shop and get the fuel pump replaced. All right guys, we got our sending unit and everything in here. Let's kind of go through this again. You can see there was all kinds of lines that I had to do. Like I said, there's a little, like a regular resonator there. That's what one line goes to. Another line would go to the charcoal canister. Another line would be this main pump line. That's the fuel pump there. So there's a strainer or sock. It's on the bottom, so it would suck fuel in here, and then it would push high pressure up and then run it through the fuel filter, and then of course up to the engine. And then there would be a return line. You can see right there, back behind them wires, it just dumps the fuel right back into the tank. So we have a little bit of wiring here to look over. Let's get this. Right here is your fuel level switch. This has an arm with a little float, and like right now it would be in the, this would be the bottom of the tank here. So as more fuel you had in there, this would float up, and this would send electrical pulses or electrical current up to your gauge. This is more of a variable resistor is what they call this. So power goes in here, and then it goes through resistor, and then as that, it increases or decreases the resistance as the fuel level goes up and down. And then of course that's what makes the gauge move on your dash. So if you don't have a fuel gauge that works, a lot of times the culprit is this right here. I haven't had a chance to test this yet, and I was going to go ahead and get one, and right now cannot find one handy. So we're going to put this together and put it back in, and if it doesn't work, then we'll search a little harder to find that. But we're just going to go with that. This is working right now. Okay, to remove this fuel pump, you can see I've kind of already jumped ahead here. We have a couple of fuel line clamps. If this pump may have been replaced at one time, sometimes from the factory they have a pinch clamp that you got to take a pair of side clips and snip off. And basically here we had to take two fuel clamps off. This hose, you slide it off. You disconnect your electrical connection down here at the pump. And then we need to pop this sock off, and then this should pop off. This had the like a foam rubber around this pump that kind of flaked off when I got it out. So we're going to replace the pump and this strainer. I picked up a new strainer also. So okay guys, we're checking the parts. This is our old fuel pump and our fuel rail that goes inside the tank. We got the new pump, and there's the new pump. It's in the package. It comes with some gaskets, O-rings, and extra fuel, a new fuel line that would go here with some extra clamps. It comes with the isolator bushing here, or isolator pad that's supposed to go around the pump that flaked off. So it comes with that. It also comes with, if you need to do some wiring repairs, this pump probably covers several different applications. So if the wires need to be changed, if the connector's not right, they come with the wires to take care of that too. But what didn't come with the pump was this pickup sock, and most of the time that thing is super brittle, and as I was just looking, I've actually tore it right there. That just snaps onto the bottom of the pump after you have it installed onto your rail. That just snaps on. So we're going to go ahead and replace that too. It doesn't look bad as far as being plugged up with gunk or anything. That tank's pretty well clean inside, but if this was all black, had a bunch of like rust scales and stuff around it, you definitely want to replace that. But most of the time they break, so I usually go ahead and try to pick up a pickup sock. Sometimes they come with the pump kit. This one didn't. I had to buy it extra. It was like extra $6 for that, but it just snaps on the bottom of the pump after we install it onto the rail. Okay guys, last time we had this all laid out, we was checking our parts to see if we had everything was correct, and I actually ended up having to stop, and some of my parts wasn't correct. So I had to go back to the parts store, and basically I had to get a new pickup sock. So now we're back at it. As we can see, these parts ain't an exact match fit, but they will fit. So we've already made sure the connections were correct. They did leave us enough hose. This pump is a little bit shorter. My issue was the sock that they originally gave me wasn't going to fit on the bottom of this. So we do have a sock now that will fit on the bottom of this. Now we're going to get this all mounted up and get it ready to go back into the tank. Stick with me. Alright, we're over here at the fuel tank now. First thing we got to do is, we're going to take this There's a O-ring that just sits on top of this, and that seals the sending unit housing into the tank. And then the next thing that has to happen is we have to carefully get everything to go in without knocking everything apart. You might have to gently bend that sock. And then we just make sure that we didn't ding up the... That's going to be going something similar to that there. And I got to go get the bolts that bolt this other ring on. Okay, we're going to double check, make sure that's all centered in there just the way it should be. Now this ring here is going to determine, there's a couple of holes right there and there, and then there's a couple of tip ups on that, and that's going to determine the alignment. But the first thing I got to do is, actually I probably should have had this on first, is I got to gently pick that up and get that fed in there. Get it sitting on top of this the way it should. Okay, like I said, the little, you're in there. I'm going to double check. Now, if you was doing this like on a pickup truck, a car, or something, this fastener here may be different. Some of the plastic tanks may have a screw fitting. Most of the others, I know Ford and stuff, have this ring that you have to take a chisel or something and turn this ring that sits in and locks in. This connection may just be slightly different. This here has 6 bolts that just sandwich this gasket, O-ring gasket in. And then we're going to, almost like putting a tire on a car, we're going to sit there and start snugging these down. I'll start with the center to make sure we're seating this gasket evenly. So we don't want to just crank down on one bolt and then have this cocked, and we'll create a fuel leak when the fuel tank's full. I'm going to start off with a little nut driver assembly here. Go back and forth here until we get going back and forth between these two, and I'm just kind of hand tightening them. Now I'm going to go and these don't have to be torqued down really super hard. We're just going to give them good and snug almost all the way around. It's not like we're going seating metal to metal. We're just smashing a gasket down here. I'm going to give them all about the same little snug all the way around. And we should be good to go there. Everything's fastened back down. We have the fuel pump assembly back on all the pickup tube. Got this all fastened back down. We'll move on to the next thing.